They called corn dogs cheap fairground junk, the kind of food you laugh at before taking a bite. But what happens when the ridiculous American snack turns out to be crispy, sweet, salty, portable, and dangerously easy to love? Maybe the real surprise is not the corn dog at all. Maybe it is how quickly one bite can expose the difference between the America people hear about and the America they actually experience. One bite, America. A corn dog can look almost ridiculous when you describe it out loud. A hot dog dipped in cornmeal batter, fried until golden, pushed onto a wooden stick, then carried around a fairground like this is somehow a completely normal lunch, and yet that may be exactly why it works so well. State fairs were never built around restraint. They are places where tractors sit beside Ferris wheels, prize livestock share space with neon lights, and food is expected to keep up with the energy. That is where the cultural gap becomes interesting. In cities like Paris, Vienna, or Amsterdam, visitors are more likely to associate casual food with bakeries, sandwiches, pastries, sausages, or market stalls where the meal still looks recognizably connected to everyday eating. At an American state fair, the rules loosen almost immediately. A sausage does not simply stay a sausage. It gets coated in slightly sweet cornmeal batter, fried until crisp, mounted on a stick, and suddenly becomes something designed for walking, laughing, watching livestock competitions, and carrying a giant lemonade at the same time. For someone arriving in the United States during the 2026 World Cup after years of seeing America filtered through headlines about conflict, cost, crime, or political division, a county fair can feel strangely disarming. There is no grand speech about American culture happening here. There are families standing in line, kids dragging stuffed prizes larger than their torsos, local vendors working hot fryers, and somebody happily eating a corn dog under a sky full of carnival lights. That ordinary scene can do more to complicate a stereotype than another 100 arguments on television, and then comes the bite. The outside has that crisp edge from the fryer, but the cornmeal batter brings a gentle sweetness that changes the whole experience. It is familiar enough because the center is still a hot dog, yet different enough to make people pause and reconsider what they thought they understood. In Britain, a sausage roll wraps sausage meat in flaky pastry. In Germany, bratwurst often relies on the sausage, bread, and mustard doing the work. The corn dog takes a different route entirely. It feels less like a carefully plated snack and more like someone at a fair asked, "How do we make this easier to eat while walking past a demolition derby?" That question is very American in the best possible way. There is practicality hidden inside all the fun. The stick means no fork, no plate, and no need to stop moving. The batter protects the sausage, gives it texture, and turns something ordinary into something that belongs specifically to the fairground. It is food engineered for noise, crowds, summer heat, long lines, and people who somehow still have one hand occupied by a stuffed bear they definitely did not plan on taking home. That is why calling a corn dog fair food junk can miss the larger point. Nobody is serving it as a daily national diet or pretending it belongs beside fine dining. It belongs to a particular American ritual, just as mulled wine belongs naturally at a German Christmas market or churros make sense at a Spanish fair. Context changes everything. And once that context is experienced in person, America can start looking very different from the version built entirely from distant headlines. It becomes warmer, funnier, more local, and far more human. Sometimes all it takes is a wooden stick, a paper tray, and one surprisingly good bite. Funnel cake. Trap. Funnel cake has a strange talent. It can make a perfectly reasonable adult forget every rule they normally have about dessert within 30 seconds. From a distance, it looks like someone dropped a ball of shoelaces into a fryer and then covered the evidence with powdered sugar. Up close, the logic becomes much harder to resist. The real reason people get hooked is texture. Funnel cake sits in a very specific sweet spot between crisp and soft. The thin outer strands fry quickly, so they develop a light crunch, while the thicker crossings stay warmer and more tender. That constant shift means every bite feels slightly different. One piece snaps, the next bends, another carries a pocket of powdered sugar that lands on your shirt like a tiny white confession. That unevenness matters more than it seems. A croissant in Paris is built around precision. A Belgian waffle in Brussels usually arrives with a recognizable grid and a fairly controlled structure. Funnel cake does the opposite. It is deliberately messy, tangled, and unpredictable, and that casualness is part of the pleasure. It feels made for a place where nobody is sitting upright under linen napkins. People are walking, talking, watching rides spin above them, and sharing food from paper plates while someone nearby is probably trying to win a stuffed animal the size of a Labrador. There is also a very American idea hiding inside the recipe: dessert as an event rather than a course. At many European cafes, sweets are tied to a table, a fork, a cup of coffee, and a slower rhythm. At an American state fair, dessert becomes portable entertainment. The food does not ask you to stop the day, it joins the day. That difference helps explain why funnel cake can become so memorable to visitors who arrive expecting American food to be mostly burgers, fries, and oversized portions. The surprise is that the fair has its own food language, and this dish is one of its loudest accents. The numbers tell part of that story. The Iowa State Fair reported more than 18 million visitors in 2023, while the Minnesota State Fair drew over 1.8 million people that same year. Crowds on that scale create their own food culture. Vendors need dishes that are fast to produce, easy to share, easy to recognize from 20 feet away, and rewarding enough to justify standing in line under the summer sun. Funnel cake fits that environment almost suspiciously well. It also feeds into one of the most powerful eating habits: contrast. Food scientists have long studied how people tend to enjoy combinations of textures and the mix of fat, sugar, and aroma because they keep the palate engaged. Funnel cake delivers all three without pretending to be subtle. Hot fried dough, cool powdered sugar, crisp edges, soft centers, and that smell drifting across the midway to most of the selling before the first bite even happens. This is where the cultural comparison becomes especially fun. In Vienna, pastry culture often celebrates craftsmanship and refinement. In America, the State Fair can celebrate joyful excess with the same amount of confidence. Neither approach cancels out the other. They simply answer different questions. One asks, how elegant can dessert become? The other asks, can we eat this while walking toward a Ferris wheel? And somehow under those lights, the second question becomes very persuasive. Pork chop swagger. Some foods arrive at a state fair looking like snacks. A pork chop on a stick arrives looking as though Iowa just handed you its business card. There is something almost comically straightforward about it. A thick pork chop, grilled until the edges pick up a little char, fitted with a wooden handle, and served without the usual ceremony of a restaurant plate. Yet this is exactly why the dish deserves more attention than its simplicity suggests. At fairs such as the Iowa State Fair, food is often doing something Europeans may not immediately expect from festival cooking. It is showing visitors where the surrounding region actually comes from. Iowa is one of America's agricultural powerhouses, and has long ranked as the country's leading hog-producing state. The Iowa State Fair itself drew more than 1 million visitors in 2023. Put those two facts together and a pork chop suddenly stops looking like another oversized American snack. It becomes local agriculture walking around on a stick. That connection gives American state fairs a very different personality from many famous European city festivals. At Munich's Oktoberfest, pork is certainly everywhere, from Schweinshacks to sausages, but the experience is wrapped in beer hall traditions and Bavarian hospitality. In Iowa, the fairground brings farming much closer to the foreground. Livestock competitions, agricultural exhibits, producers, 4-H programs, and food stands all exist within the same sprawling event. You can see the agricultural system and then, several minutes later, eat something directly associated with it. There is very little distance between farm identity and dinner. That may sound ordinary to Americans who grew up around county fairs, but to a visitor from London, Paris, or Amsterdam, where food increasingly appears at the end of a long, urban supply chain, the directness can be surprisingly appealing. American fair culture does not hide the fact that food comes from farms. It practically puts a spotlight on it, hands it a blue ribbon, and then offers mustard on the side. The wooden stick adds another layer of American practicality. A pork chop normally belongs on a plate beside potatoes and vegetables. At the fair, someone has essentially converted it into agricultural street food. It is the culinary equivalent of putting cup holders in a pickup truck. Once you experience the convenience, arguing against it becomes harder than expected. What makes the pork chop memorable, though, is not simply its size or the novelty of carrying meat by the handle. It carries regional confidence. Wisconsin has dairy, Texas has beef and smoke. Iowa has pork, corn, and farming woven deeply into its identity. State fair food gives those differences room to stay visible rather than sanding every region down into the same national menu. That is one of the most charming things outsiders can discover about America. The country is enormous, but its local cultures still show up loudly on the plate. European visitors arriving during the World Cup may come expecting the United States they have seen in international news: giant cities, political arguments, and familiar fast food chains. Then somewhere beyond the stadiums, they find an entirely different America where farmers compete for ribbons, families spend the whole day at the fair, and lunch comes directly from the identity of the state hosting them. A pork chop on a stick will never look sophisticated in the Parisian sense. That is precisely why America should keep serving it. Cookie bucket fever. There's something wonderfully unreasonable about buying chocolate chip cookies by the bucket, yet the Minnesota State Fair has managed to make that sentence sound completely normal. Sweet Martha's cookie jar serves warm cookies piled so high above the rim that the container looks less like packaging and more like a dare involving gravity. People walk away holding them with both hands, carefully protecting a mountain of cookies that appears one pothole away from becoming public property. The interesting part is not really the cookie. America already has plenty of chocolate chip cookies. What makes this fair tradition so addictive is the idea of abundance becoming a social experience. A bakery in Copenhagen might sell you 2 beautifully shaped cookies beside a coffee. In Amsterdam, a specialty cookie shop can turn one thick, carefully made cookie into the entire event. Minnesota takes the opposite approach during the state fair. Instead of making scarcity feel luxurious, it makes generosity feel festive. The bucket is supposed to look excessive because the excess creates the moment. You are meant to carry it around, pass it between friends, give one to somebody who suddenly appears beside you with suspiciously perfect timing, and eventually realize that a container that looked impossible 15 minutes ago is somehow showing daylight at the bottom. That is why the bucket works psychologically better than a neat 6-cookie box ever could. Food researchers have long observed that eating is influenced by social context. People often consume more when eating with others, partly because meals last longer and partly because sharing changes the rhythm of attention. A bucket of warm cookies practically turns that effect into fairground architecture. Nobody counts carefully. Someone reaches in while talking, another person grabs one while walking, and the cookies disappear quietly in the background, like office donuts after somebody sends the free food in the break room message. Minnesota certainly has the crowd to support that ritual. The state fair attracted a record 2,126,551 visitors in 2019, making it one of the largest state fairs in the country. When more than 2 million people pass through the gates over the run of a fair, food stops behaving like a private meal and becomes part of the public atmosphere. Seeing thousands of people carrying the same overflowing bucket creates its own form of temptation. At some point, resistance begins to feel less like discipline and more like accidentally missing the memo. The warm temperature adds another advantage. Chocolate chip cookies are familiar almost everywhere, but serving them fresh changes the experience immediately. The chocolate stays soft, the center retains moisture, and the smell travels before the bucket reaches you. That aroma matters because smell is closely tied to appetite and memory. A warm cookie can summon childhood kitchens, school bake sales, family gatherings, and Saturday afternoons before anyone has consciously decided they are hungry. Then Minnesota adds a bucket. That small act transforms comfort food into spectacle without ruining what made the food comforting in the first place. And this is where American fair culture becomes especially lovable. Europeans sometimes arrive expecting American excess to mean wastefulness or thoughtless size. A state fair can reveal another version of abundance entirely. Enough to share, enough to laugh about, enough to become part of the memory of the day. There is no silverware, no reserved table, and no need to whisper about tasting notes. The bucket travels with the group until everybody has powdered sugar, chocolate, or crumbs somewhere they did not intend. At a fine European cafe, the dessert may belong to the person who ordered it. At the Minnesota State Fair, the bucket seems to belong to whoever can reach it. That may be the most American ingredient of all. Cream puff madness. Some state fair foods win people over by being outrageous. Wisconsin's cream puff has managed something harder. It became so beloved that removing it would probably cause more public confusion than moving the Ferris wheel into the parking lot. That is what makes this one fascinating. The Wisconsin State Fair's original cream puff has been served since 1924, making it a century-old tradition rather than a modern stunt designed for social media. Each puff is built from a light shoe-style shell, split open and filled with a generous mound of fresh whipped cream before the top goes back on like a hat that has clearly lost control of the situation. The fair reportedly sells hundreds of thousands of them during a single run, often more than 300,000. At that scale, the cream puff stops behaving like dessert and starts acting like a temporary state currency. And the reason people become attached to it has surprisingly little to do with culinary novelty. This is comfort through repetition. A family can come to the same fair across several generations and buy essentially the same cream puff their parents or grandparents once carried through those grounds. The rides change, ticket prices change, music changes, and somebody eventually decides another carnival attraction needs to spin upside down at highway speed, but the cream puff stays familiar. That kind of continuity is powerful because food is unusually good at storing memory. Psychologists have repeatedly found strong links between smell, taste, and autobiographical memory. One familiar aroma can pull an old moment forward faster than a photograph sometimes can. Wisconsin State Fair has accidentally built an enormous annual memory machine out of whipped cream. European visitors may recognize the basic pastry immediately. France has choux pastry, Paris has profiteroles and eclairs, and Austria has its own long tradition of cream-filled desserts. What feels different in Wisconsin is the role the pastry plays. In Paris, a beautifully finished eclair may be admired for technique and presentation. At the state fair, the cream puff is less interested in behaving politely. The whipped cream is piled high enough that taking a clean bite becomes a personal ambition rather than a realistic plan. There's an oddly warm American confidence in that. A state fair does not always need to reinvent food to make it special. Sometimes America takes a familiar European pastry technique, lets it grow into a regional tradition, connects it to local dairy culture, then serves it to hundreds of thousands of people until it becomes inseparable from the identity of the fair itself. Wisconsin is an especially fitting home for that tradition. The state is famous for dairy production, and its America's Dairyland identity appears everywhere from cheese curds to milk to butter sculptures. A cream puff filled with fresh whipped cream therefore feels less like a random dessert choice and more like Wisconsin putting its agricultural personality into pastry form. That is the deeper charm outsiders often miss when they reduce American fair food to too much sugar or too much cream. The portion may be generous, but the emotional value is bigger than the serving size. People are not lining up merely because whipped cream tastes good. They are lining up because they remember doing it before. For someone discovering America during a long trip, that can be a surprisingly beautiful lesson. Beneath all the giant portions, neon signs, and playful excess, state fairs are also about continuity. They allow communities to repeat small traditions until those traditions become part of how a place recognizes itself. Wisconsin could probably make the cream puff smaller. At this point, nobody should risk it. Butter went rogue. There's a point at an American state fair where food stops asking permission from common sense, and deep-fried butter is standing right at that line with a grin on its face. Even by fairground standards, the name sounds like somebody lost a bet. Butter is normally what food gets fried in. America looked at that arrangement and apparently wondered why butter was being denied the opportunity to become the main character. That joke actually reveals something much more interesting about state fair culture. These fairs function like giant public test kitchens, where being unusual is an advantage. One of the clearest examples comes from the State Fair of Texas. Its Big Tex Choice Awards began in 2005 as a competition for concessionaires creating new fair foods. 4 years later, Abel Gonzalez Jr. introduced fried butter and won the award for Most Creative. The dish was not simply a stick of butter thrown into oil, despite what the name allows everyone to imagine. Small portions of whipped butter were frozen, covered in dough, fried, and served warm so the butter melted inside. That distinction probably does very little to reassure a first-time European visitor, but it explains why the dish became famous. Deep-fried butter was designed to make people stop walking, turn around and say, "They fried what?" That moment is valuable currency at an American fair. Compare that with food traditions in cities such as Lyon or Bologna, where prestige often comes from protecting established recipes and regional techniques. A bouchon in Lyon earns respect by doing something recognizable exceptionally well. Bologna proudly guards traditions around fresh pasta, mortadella, and ragu. At a state fair in Texas, meanwhile, a vendor can earn attention by treating the deep fryer like the culinary equivalent of a garage full of power tools and asking what has not been attempted yet. There is something wonderfully American about that attitude because it turns food into invention. The country has a long affection for competitions built around making, improving, growing, or building something better than the person in the next booth. State fairs historically celebrated agriculture through prize cattle, giant pumpkins, preserves, pies, machinery, and craftsmanship. Modern novelty food contests take that same competitive instinct and move it behind the concession counter. Instead of asking who grew the biggest squash, somebody's now asking who can make the most talked about thing on a paper tray. Deep fried butter makes sense once viewed through that lens. Its appeal comes partly from rarity. You do not wake up on a normal Wednesday morning in Dallas and casually put fried butter beside your coffee. The absurdity works because the fair has an expiration date. Visitors know they have a short window to try the strange thing everyone is photographing, talking about, and daring their friends to taste. Scarcity turns curiosity into action remarkably fast. Psychology has a name for part of this: novelty seeking. New sensory experiences capture attention because the brain naturally responds to unexpected stimuli. At a limited time event, a crowd, the smell of fryers, and a food with a name that sounds impossible, and self-control suddenly has a much tougher afternoon. This is also why judging America exclusively through ordinary restaurant food misses some of its most entertaining culinary culture. State fair cooking is closer to an invention contest you can eat. Some ideas disappear after one season, others become legends. Deep-fried butter became one of those legends because it represents something larger than calories. It captures the mischievous American instinct to look at a perfectly settled rule and ask whether anybody has actually tried breaking it yet. And at a state fair, somebody usually has. Candy bar alchemy. A candy bar normally has a very clear career plan. You unwrap it, eat it, and move on with your afternoon. At an American state fair, somebody looked at that perfectly successful arrangement and decided the candy bar still had untapped potential. That is how you end up holding a deep-fried candy bar. What makes this particular fair food so fascinating is not simply the extra layer of batter or the obvious sugar rush. The real trick happens inside. Heat turns a familiar packaged candy into something almost unrecognizable. Chocolate loosens, caramel becomes softer, nougat changes texture, and the batter forms a warm shell around everything. The snack people thought they knew suddenly behaves more like a fresh dessert. That transformation is the entire attraction. Humans are unusually responsive to foods that combine temperature, texture, and familiarity in unexpected ways. A candy bar already carries an advantage because the flavor is known before the first bite. Frying it adds uncertainty without removing that sense of comfort. Your brain recognizes the brand, but your mouth gets a completely different experience. It is a little like hearing your favorite country song performed by a brass band at halftime. The melody is still there, but somebody has given it a much louder weekend. Fair vendors understand that instinct extremely well. The State Fair of Texas, which regularly attracts more than 2 million visitors during its annual run, has built an entire reputation around foods that take familiar ingredients and give them one outrageous upgrade. In an environment that crowded, novelty has practical value. A vendor has only a few seconds to make someone walking past dozens of competing stands stop and spend money. Chocolate bar barely slows anybody down. Deep-fried chocolate bar can cause an immediate U-turn. There's also a funny European twist hiding here. Scotland became famous for the deep-fried Mars bar, which emerged from fish and chip shop culture in the 1990s, and eventually became a piece of international food folklore. So Europeans encountering the American Fair version cannot exactly claim the continent has clean hands in this particular culinary crime scene. The difference is the setting. In Scotland, the fried Mars bar became known as an eccentric chip shop creation. At an American fair, frying packaged sweets fits into a much larger culture of temporary experimentation. Oreos, candy bars, cheesecake, cookie dough, and even stranger candidates can all find themselves approaching the fryer because fair food rewards curiosity almost as much as flavor. That creates a kind of permission people rarely give themselves elsewhere. Most adults spend the rest of the year making sensible choices, reading nutrition labels, ordering the side salad, and pretending they did not see the dessert menu. A state fair offers a short vacation from all of that responsibility. Nobody seriously believes a fried candy bar belongs in the food pyramid. That is almost the point. Its appeal comes from knowing the experience is temporary. And perhaps this is one reason American fairs can feel so refreshing to visitors who arrive with a rigid picture of the country. America is often discussed abroad through statistics, politics, and problems. Then visitors encounter a place where thousands of families are laughing over an absurd dessert invented because someone wondered what would happen if a Snickers wore a coat of batter. That kind of America is difficult to capture in a headline. It is playful, curious, comfortably unembarrassed, and remarkably good at turning an ordinary supermarket snack into the story everyone tells on the ride home. Maybe that is the real charm of America's state fairs. The food looks excessive from a distance, but up close it feels playful, local, generous, and deeply tied to place. A corn dog or cream puff can become a small memory of a much bigger country, one that often feels warmer in person than in the headlines. Which fair food would you make a first-time visitor try first? Tell us below and subscribe for more surprising sides of America.